And welcome to another episode of Triple Tap. I'm excited. Are you guys excited tonight? We've got a great speaker for you to listen to tonight. And we are up to Triple Tap episode number 20. Ken and Lance, how are you both this week and what kind of a week have you had? Who would like to go first this week? Lance?
Oh, I'd love to go first. Yeah, guys, if you haven't noticed, I've been missing in action a little bit lately. We've been having some birthing pains, which is pretty exciting. We're about to birth a new nation. So there's been a lot of work happening in the background. I can report that that's ready to launch. So a couple of days of registered mail delivery, 28 days, and we're going to have some massive news for the whole of Australia. So something to look forward to. It's been keeping me busy.
Excellent. And what about you, Ken? I know you've been pretty busy as well. What have you been up to?
Yeah, okay. So I've been up to superannuation. I've been following what's going on with the Australian Reserve Bank, with what's going on with BlackRock filing for bankruptcy in the US. Those things are pretty frightening to me. I'm not giving anyone any financial advice, but I've been working out my superannuation, getting it all out of there, putting it into gold medal under a self-managed fund. That's taking a bit of time, but it's I think it'll be worth it. I noticed that so many people are concerned about it. That Q Super, which only used to be able to be accessed by government employees, they've now employed a special economist to advise people to say, and I listened to that today, to say, look, I take no responsibility for this advice, but everything's going to be great. It sounds a little bit like, take this, it's safe and effective. But anyway, I just decided, not trusting that. So all my super is coming out. Everything I own is coming out of the banks, and it's a little bit of work, but I'm getting it done.
Yeah, rightly so. I think everyone's a little bit concerned with the banks at the moment. I've been warning one of my family members that, look, this could happen. If you have a lot of money in there, you might lose it all. What are you going to do? And I just saw another article today, which I believe we posted on the main Telegram page, that Westpac's cut more branches and things like that around the country. And of course, we know Bankwest has shut a lot of the branches all down the East Coast. So it looks like it's starting to happen. So I would be very concerned if I was someone who had a lot of money in the bank right now. So very interesting times we're going into, but we will get underway. We have a very exciting person that we're going to interview tonight from the Australian Medical Professionals Society, called AMPS, which is an industrial association of employees whose principal purpose is to protect and promote the interests of its members in matters concerning their employment. They're a non-party political alternative to the AMA and ASMOF, and their mission is to fight for doctors' rights at work and beyond without the politics or exorbitant fees. So tonight we're going to be speaking to Dr. Christopher Neal, who's a mid-career cardiologist, having been continuously engaged in medicine or the study of medicine for 26 years. Since specialization, he has undertaken doctoral and postdoctoral studies, being successful in obtaining research grants, completing investigative-driven studies, and supervising and co-supervising higher degree research students to completion, in addition to supervising and mentoring multiple physicians in training. His passion within medicine has been the optimization of care for patients with chronic heart failure, and he has been privileged to co-develop better models of service within the public hospital system. Dr. Neal is also married with 8 children. He's been very busy. Due to a variety of concerns, Dr. Neal elected not to receive vaccinations against COVID-19, despite the mandation of these in Victoria in October 2021. He was a founding member of AMPS, and since then, he's been involved in a variety of pursuits beyond medicine, including standing in the federal election this year and engaging in the advocacy work of AMPS, of which he is the president. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's invite Dr. Chris Neal to the call. There he is. Welcome, Christopher Neal. How are you this evening? Great to have you with us.
Yeah, really well. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. We have a lot of questions we're going to ask you tonight, so let's get underway. Kent, Lance, you got any great questions to start with for Dr. Neal?
Well, let me just start by saying, Chris, thanks for coming on the show, mate. You and I have been talking backwards and forwards for quite a while now. And as I've closely followed what you've been up to, and with COVID Medical Network, and also with other endeavours you've been working on, AMPS, mate, the Australian Medical Practitioners Society. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Can you look here at TAP? We're creating new systems for the country, and I think that what you're doing is extremely important. You want to share a bit about what AMPS actually is, and why you got involved in it?
Sure. Look, again, yeah, thanks for having me on, Kent. We've been in touch for about a year, I think now. And I've been very interested in what you're doing, which is really, I think, breaking new ground together with TAP. Basically, AMPS was formed in September last year, as a few of us got together with the executives of Red Union, which is pre-existing business and union, particularly providing services for nurses, as it had been in Queensland for about 8 years, with a really good track record at representing them in the workplace, and things like whistleblowing and other things at half the cost of most of the unions, like ANU, the Australian Nurses Union. Really good guys who could see that the mandates were not really consistent with the values of their members. They surveyed their members, that is their nursing members. They found that over half of them were against these in principle. And so they were gearing up to fight mandates for their members in their existing union, but wanted to really discuss how relevant this would be for doctors. So I had been working closely with other doctors across Australia, mainly linked virtually online and things. I'd been working in an effort to bring to prescribe ivermectin before it was shut down, as people may know, in September 2021 by the TGA. Been doing a few things, and out of that sort of association, we thought it was going to be relevant and in fact really necessary to start to band together to work out what we were going to do with mandates. So in addition, we always had the vision that AMPS would be a way that we could find our voice, a way that doctors who were not in agreement with the agenda, which is a whole can of worms we can talk about, would be able to come together and have their voice heard. And I think that's really, really important. I think that's been a long time coming in a sense, but now I think there are voices which, importantly, they are visible and credible and Australian. We have to have our own homegrown voices from all sectors, but certainly medicine. So AMPS kickstarted then, and we found ourselves rapidly embroiled along with the nursing unions and other unions in the fight, particularly with the mandated vaccinations. And just in Victoria, roughly mid-October, it was quite satisfying that we were growing quickly. We're trying to support each other, and we elected to pursue that strategy, which some of you may know, of asking for a risk assessment. Now, a risk assessment in terms of the OH&S laws of this nation really has to be done before any intervention that's designed to offset a hazard in the workplace. So the strategy was to ask for that. And what was, I guess, satisfying was it was clear that they hadn't anticipated this strategy, and they hadn't anticipated a unionized approach, because of course the unions, traditional unions, had really been in lockstep with government. So the phenomenon we were seeing and continue to see is that the unions, instead of representing the unique individual needs and concerns of their members, were reversing that and representing the opinion of the government and their handpicked experts, and really requiring their members to toe the line. Quite an incredible inversion of what unions have traditionally been. But then again, this whole thing's been so unprecedented. So it was satisfying that we'd taken them by surprise, but unfortunately, the pushback in Victoria, which I can speak to, was pretty severe. Monash Hospital had treated some nurses we felt really badly, and so they were the test case. And what was interesting was that the Deputy Attorney General, from memory, of the state of Victoria represented Monash Hospital. Now, Monash Hospital is a separate entity than the Crown, the government of Victoria, but the Crown represented them. That was really odd to me. But the idea was very powerful, that because we were in a state of emergency, that no consideration needed to be given to our concern to have a risk assessment. And
because
that's really,
because it's an emergency, right? There's no reason to actually see if the measure that you're going to implement is actually going to be better than the emergency. That's what they're saying.
Yeah. Now, on that note, I'll just shut that door. On that note, it is important to say that people may elect to not get vaccinated for a lot of different reasons. My initial reason and going down this journey was to do with aborted fetal stem cells used in vaccinations, and to me, that's a complicated issue, but certainly not one that I want dictated to me in my conscience. People had a lot of different reasons, and the key is that we're not anti-science. We're not. We don't like being characterised as anti-vax because we want to have a rational discussion, pros and cons, critical thinking about anything. And to think that a treatment just because it's labelled a vaccine should be immune from any critique is just crazy. I think it's very difficult for people to see that, and it's very easy for the community, and in fact, even potentially the bench, members of the judiciary, to just tar people with that brush, and with the anti-vax brush, as if they're really an enemy of the public good. That's how it feels, and I think that's just a massive problem that's been brewing in this community for actually a long time. And yeah.
Now, what we're seeing with the creation of AMPS, with the creation of the Australian Medical Network, with Dr. Robin Cosford and Dr. Hobart, etc., and we're seeing a lot of doctors and Australian scientists, medical researchers stand up. Recently, we've seen the creation of the paper that shows all of the statistics around the COVID vaccines and exactly the amount of damage and pain and suffering and death that has been endured by the Australian people. Certainly, it's well known now that Queensland's, I shouldn't laugh, it's very sad, that the death rate in Queensland is, as of the end of July, 30,000 people have passed away more than normally should have during the last calendar year. That was at the end of July. I don't have statistics at the moment. So it's an extra 30,000 people have passed away with only one thing changing in the, across the board. Now we're seeing
climate change. Is that climate change, Kent?
Yeah, no, it wasn't climate change. It was, of course, the vaccines, the COVID vaccines. So 30,000 extra deaths just in Queensland for the calendar year up to the end of July. We're seeing a lot of these statistics come out, the paper that I referred to before, and we're seeing doctors stand up and almost, if you believe in the press, to no effect. In fact, I've not seen AMPS spoken of in the mainstream media. This is a huge thing, right? These are our awesome Australian doctors and medical researchers leading the way and showing the way to the future. And my take on it, Chris, is that it's because of corrupt medical governance. A lot of Australians agree with me on that. I know that, well, I suspect you agree. I don't want to put words in your mouth. What sort of effect is AMPS having towards a better future for medical delivery in this country? What sort of effect is it having now?
Well, I think we're in the kind of difficult situation as a nation. Is at the same time we've got actually an excellent health system, but yes, at the same time there's just a new situation where there's record dissatisfaction with doctors and the health system, and we have an incredible capacity to deliver good healthcare. The things which are undermining that, I think, in my opinion, are trust of doctors and of hospitals. And I'm saying this on the basis of many people talking to me about their experiences. And we're talking about the vaccine, obviously, tonight, the COVID-19 vaccines, which is, books are already being written about. Many books will continue to be written about what's gone on over the last few years regarding the vaccine in particular and how they came, how we all came to be in this situation. But I guess if there's one thing that has undermined trust, it's doctors, patients who know that doctors are actually being obliged to toe the line regarding government public policy, whether it's state or federal, regarding the vaccine. So patients, numbers of patients, I haven't been practicing this year, but last year it was clear that my patients knew that doctors were not able to speak freely. Not all of them, but certainly a good proportion. That's a very uncomfortable position to be in. Doctors should be able to say what they think is appropriate to say out of their wisdom and knowledge and experience. That's what makes them doctors. They should be able to say that publicly in a professional way, and they should be certainly able to say it to you privately as a patient, which is really, I guess, the issue of the doctor-patient relationship. You have to be absolutely confident that your doctor can tell you their opinion exactly as it is, and their duty, that they'll fulfill their duty to be absolutely truthful and to do everything in your best interest. So we're in this situation where where this issue, I think, of trust, the central issue of trust, has really been undermined, and I think that's really paying a huge toll. I'll say a few other things. I think job satisfaction in the health system is low and has been low for quite some time. There's lots of factors, but they pretty much all revolve around COVID. Things like wearing masks with patients. I mean, it's lacking that contact and most of this, I hope, most doctors got into medicine really because of people and the ability to touch people's lives in a good way. But when you've got a mask, over you, it's not what you really signed up for. And I think there's huge challenges for job satisfaction. There's massive pressures on the ambulance services. There may be a degree of dissatisfaction being driven by doctors, departments, where they know something's wrong with the safety signals concerning the vaccine. But they know that they can't be true to that. They can't be vocal about that. I've got examples. I heard of a whole department really where recently where one individual doctor had been vocal and really taking the mickey out of the mandates and the performance of the vaccine. Now that's his opinion, that the vaccine was not performing well in terms of what his community was suffering through COVID infection, despite high vaccination rates. And the reasoning that is provided by by state governments as to why the vaccine is needed. And those reasons are just flat out not true. So he was able to, I'll just say those reasons. So the reason that is typically given is that it reduces transmission. You may have heard that. So the only really ethical strength in a mandate of a health workplace is to say that it's not about you, it's about your patients. So if you, if you were to leave it out of that, the issue of transmission, it's really up to the individual to bear their risk and have the dignity of choosing whether they will take the risk of not being vaccinated. And then I'm assuming there that's I'm assuming that's a vaccine that works, okay, in that example. But if you say that regardless of your own individual choice, you as a professional cannot pass an infection on to a patient, that's an issue of transmissibility. And what we know is that never at any time in the history of this whole vaccine rollout, in the history of all the studies that have been done, has there been a clear-cut position that you reduce transmission to your patients. So that's, and in fact, there's some studies which show the opposite, and that is that when you're vaccinated and asymptomatic, you're more likely to pass on the virus particle. So going back, he was able to highlight those sort of things which people know or can be, made to know through careful explanation are not true. And he's basically in a situation where, because he was consistently vocal, his whole large percentage of his department is really now aligned against taking whatever other jabs are mandated. So job satisfaction is low, huge pressures on the system. You asked me initially what AMPS is doing in that space. To be honest, we're just essentially trying to grow and to support, to provide solidarity for our members, and to, again, as I said, to articulate ourselves in the public space. We recently asked, surveyed our members what they want us to be doing, and the feedback we're getting is just keep doing what you're doing. I think particularly after our recent conference called Reclaiming Medicine, I think that people want to see us step up and be an alternative voice that I think represents what so many people are thinking.
Dr. Neil, what sort of funding will be required to ensure that AMPS will become a success and continue to be able to do what they want to do?
Look, that's a complicated question. Funding. So we essentially, the business model of AMPS is that you pay an annual fee, So you pay your annual fee, and hopefully by the end of the year, if our members don't get into too much trouble, we've still got money left over. Where we want to go is a business structure which actually allows whatever's left over at the end of the year to be returned to the members. That would be where we want to go, and or rolled over into the next year or so forth. We also have fundraising. I don't have the website, but I think there's all the people have donated to us to help us cover costs. We broke even on the conference, which is brilliant. There was a substantial outlay for that conference, and we covered our costs. Yeah. So what sort of money? It depends on what projects we do or support. I can speak about more of what we're doing, perhaps as well.
We'll just throw in a question there from one of our viewers, because we've got people on the chat who are also asking questions. So we're going to throw in one of the questions from one of our viewers. The COVID vaccine has highlighted the fact that we're not allowed to decide for ourselves, or some people think we're not allowed to decide for ourselves what to put in our bodies or the bodies of our children. How do you feel about all the other vaccines that people have opted not to give their children, which was also punished by government in order to force the issue?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm totally against no jab, no playing regarding childcare and children and vaccinations. I don't believe any. I think that's a distortion once we start incentivizing or penalizing for a complicated decision of a vaccine. I don't like it. I don't like the results. I'm now of the view that should never have happened. I think that you know, I recently heard Tony Abbott say that, say something I quite liked regarding the pandemic. He said that that our ancestors gave up their lives for freedom, and we gave up our freedom to maintain our lives. And they're great words, but I would love Tony Abbott to reflect on the beginnings of vaccine apartheid that I think started when he introduced that policy. You know, any treatment, whether it's a vaccine, a pharmaceutical of any kind, requires a decision-making process that is free of interference. It has to be, you know, it has to be absolutely aligned, you know, compatible with free informed consent, open discussion, and anything that is even remotely coercive just totally distorts the whole thing. I think we've learned this in such a bitter way. And I think that what happened was vaccine apartheid. What has happened in the last few years is vaccine apartheid, and it should disgust every Australian, even if it doesn't yet. It should, and it will. I believe that we'll see a time when when doctors and members of the public are completely disgusted with their own behaviour, and of course with the way they were manipulated by the government into this situation.
Chris, if I could bring it back to the trust, because I myself think that's going to be the biggest issue moving forward. Now, a lot of credit to you guys. You saw it coming. You made the right decisions. You've started up an alternative, AMPS, which is fantastic. The other doctors that aren't they're still stuck in the system. Are they starting to look over their shoulder and think, boy, am I going to be insured for this? Is anyone going to support me? Because I can guarantee you this, like Tony Abbott couldn't protect children from pedophiles, the government's not going to protect these doctors in the end like they promised to. They're going to throw them under the bus. So what's the deal in the industry?
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation we're in. Look, the situation of doctors is that that they can't, as you know, and your viewers would all know, they can't be conscripted into service of the federal government. And I think that's a form of separation of powers. Not that the medicos are a formal power of the government, you know, like Australia, the Commonwealth, the judiciary, the legislature, and all the other separated powers. But in a sense, doctors, it's recognised, should be independent and not able to be conscripted. And that's a beautiful thing, because that really enshrines the ideal of the doctor-patient relationship. Now, yeah, you were asking Just remind me. Sorry, had a big day.
Yeah, it's about the trust issue. Are these doctors starting to look over their shoulder now and think,
Yeah.
what's coming for me?
Yeah. So the Spiros, I mean, the idea of doctors being exempt was floated. I think it was by either Scott Morrison or the health minister, or is that the same thing? You know, last year from where everything that we got, let's just critique it, was from a podium in a press conference, often on a Friday afternoon. It was there was kind of a but those statements were very powerful. That's where the mandates were first mentioned. And by the way, they weren't. There was no law, no legislation which was passed before those press conference statements. And
Yeah, because they can't. They can't pass a law for those things, Chris, because those laws are absolutely already against the Crimes Act. So in order to, if they had have tried to legislate them, they would have automatically said it. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, I think the same. But what was remarkable is how the bureaucracy started to essentially enact those, even though it was often by an email saying, we are going to do this, so we need you to do that. And incredible. But one of those statements was that doctors would not be liable, I believe was the words. And the trouble with that statement is that no professional, by definition, can abrogate a responsibility and a corresponding liability, because that's the nature of being a professional. So that's a very difficult and broad brushstroke sort of thing to introduce that thought. But I do feel that it actually took, and the people that the medical community did actually take up that notion that they would be not liable for anything that went wrong. Now, the statement that no one would be liable was kind of carried along the thought that that there would be bad things happening to people, bad adverse events, and there certainly have been. But that liability is still an issue, and it becomes an issue when informed consent is breached in any way. And so the real question of liability is, was informed consent given properly in a way that's adequate? We have really detailed case law in Australia that's gone to the level of the High Court. Rogers versus Whittaker is the model case, but there's a huge amount of understanding built up about what constitutes proper and informed consent. So the real outcome of the statement, I think, of the health minister last year that the doctors wouldn't be liable was simply that a fund was eventually created to compensate for victims of vaccine injury. And that was about September that came online. So again, an admission that things do go wrong. But I guess what people need to understand about that is that there were only a very small handful of diagnostic groupings that could be considered for compensation. One of those was central venous thrombosis, a certain type of blood clot in the brain. And really all of those were associated with, almost all of those were associated with AstraZeneca. So I guess what I'm saying is the statement that doctors wouldn't be liable, I think, is incredibly hard to prove, let's just say. I mean, honestly, it was very ill-conceived, in my opinion. And I think that it really the only outcome was the creation of a fund, and that doesn't cover, in my opinion, hardly covers any of the people affected by vaccine injury. And in the initiation of that scheme, it's clearly said by the federal government that individuals may still seek action against doctors. So I think it was Greg Hunt, what was said was completely and dangerously misleading. It really, I think, puts doctors on a unstable footing. And I just think that always, as doctors, we need to know the treatments that we're dealing with. Exercise real caution. We shouldn't be influenced by anything other than our own independent study. We should be aware, as per the codes of conduct of APRA, actually, that we can be influenced by pharmaceutical companies, and we should be on our guard against that. And actually, I think what this has shown is that we should never substitute government statements for our own, our own process of mastering an issue. And we should give informed consent on that basis.
Look, talking about informed consent, Chris, a quick question, just a side question. There are tens of thousands of examples of this scenario I'm about to put to you. A person goes in to get the vaccine. The nurse and the doctor hand him a form that he is required to waive all responsibility for them. And he says, "Look, I don't know what this vaccine is. I've been forced by my employer to come here. I don't want this vaccine. I don't want to take this experimental drug because I don't know what's in it. You can't tell me what's in it. And I cannot possibly know or understand what effect this could have on me. Can you advise me about this?" And the doctor and the nurse said to him jointly together, "We don't care if you're being coerced to take this. We've been told to do this, so this is what we're doing. And you have to sign that form or we won't give you this vaccine." To which he replied, "Well, I don't want the vaccine, and I'm certainly not signing that piece of paper because I don't know what this will do to me." He then called his employer, or at least his direct manager, who then threatened him with his career if he didn't take the vaccine, which he recorded. He recorded that entire scenario. He's got it all documented. He then he had to take the vaccine because he was coerced. So he wrote on the form before he signed it. He wrote on the form that he had to sign the waiver and said he wrote down the name of his officer in charge. He wrote down the conversation that was had between them on the back of the form, signed it, got the nurse and the doctor to sign it, and then signed it and said, "I do so under extreme duress and fear for my health." They injected him and he passed out for 15 minutes. It was completely unconscious for 15 minutes. So that case is coming up. Now, there are a lot of cases, not with so much evidence, but there are a lot of cases like this. Where does that fit as far as informed consent is concerned? How does the doctor stand on that? I mean, this doctor and nurse both signed the form to say that they'd witnessed the conversation take place between him and his employer.
Well, I'm almost speechless. But this is what's become of, and getting back to what Lance was saying, this is what's happened to our health system and why trust is so undermined, because that behaviour was unacceptable. That behaviour was not according to the codes of conduct of Australian doctors and nurses. Nothing can be done without proper informed consent. It's actually, arguably, it constitutes, as you know, what's it called? Assault. Yeah, whenever a doctor does anything or a nurse that is not really compatible with informed consent, they should know that any aspect of informed consent, of coercion, really is undermining the free informed consent. I guess if he had an injury, and on the balance of probabilities that injury was due to the vaccine, then
well, it happened. It happened less than 2 minutes after he was injected,
Yeah.
Chris.
So that's what if that's what he's feeling, that if he takes that to court, look, everyone involved has to be part of his action, I would say.
Yeah. The look, in light of the situation that we're in, and a lot of Australians we're COVID sick, we're vaccine sick, we've heard enough of it, right? And yet here we are talking about it again.
Yeah, I know.
Because we've got to create the new systems, and this has just been problems have existed in this field for a long time. Medical governance, separation of powers, government overreach, etc. The terrible amount of pedophilia that takes place with government officials. It's a total stain on the soul of this country, where we've gone to, and the terrible freedoms, the wonderful freedoms that we've given up rather terribly to very elitist and very silly people who form the government of this country. Let's give a prime example of that. Doctor, and I'll say doctor in inverted commas, Dr. Skerritt, who is from the TGA. He's a soil man, right? He talks about the soil. That's where his doctorate is, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe he's a trained agronomist, so soil.
And to do with wheat, right?
Yeah, I believe his PhD was in wheat.
His PhD is in wheat, okay? And so this is the person
which is fine. I've got nothing against that. But I think what you're getting at is that the Australian public would expect that the person who heads up the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is a little appendage of the Federal Health Department, I think the public would expect them to be a doctor or a health professional of some sort.
Look, I would personally expect that. I'd say Australia would expect that too. And I think you're on the right track there. The lack of trust I'm talking about is when the media gets him on TV and he says, look, despite the fact that the official government statistics show that we've had tens of thousands of people suffer terrible damage and death and permanent disability from this vaccine, there's nothing to see, to worry about or watch over here. There's only been 9 cases that we even sort of worried about, and of them really only 1 or 2. This guy's not a doctor. He's a soil man, he's a wheat man. But the TV, our Australian media presents him as Dr. John Skerritt, as if he is a doctor, as if he's a medical doctor, as if he knows what he's talking about. That type of medical governance is now giving rise to organisations such as AMP, such as the Australia Project, such as the Australian Medical Network, and the list goes on and on and on. How long has this mismanagement of medical governance been going on? How long have you been dissatisfied with what's happening?
Look, I remember, I've been aware, and I mean, doctors should be aware of the influence of pharmaceutical companies on their practice, and they should be aware of the instances in which pharmaceutical companies have been associated with real disasters. Where doctors prescribing things, we can do a lot of damage. First do no harm is an incredibly important aspect of who we should be, because if we abandon first do no harm, then I think the community is in trouble. Back in my early years as a doctor, the role of pharmaceutical companies marketing directly to doctors was stronger, but there were some concerns which really blew up in the early in the 2000s, particularly with just doctors on junkets and being shouted too much entertainment and things like that. Pfizer was actually just incidentally probably on the Australian scene, the company which did more to cause that blow up. It became, I think, rightly so, a bit of a national focus. And so back to I remember I was paradoxically flown over to Cleveland, the Cleveland Clinic, in about 2010 by a drug company to help me to get to a conference. I was a PhD student, so I didn't have the means to get there myself, and I was presenting some of my research there. And I vividly remember going to a meeting where I heard the head of cardiology speaking at the Cleveland Clinic, and he was a very good man who had broken the story on a drug called rosiglitazone, a diabetes drug, which had been around for the better part of 10 years all around the world, and just in the US alone had been raking in for the company GlaxoSmithKline about $4.5 billion a year. And he just gave this vivid story of how he was really suspecting that this drug was causing heart attacks. And of course, if your drug's causing heart attacks, then a proportion of those people will die or get heart failure or really severe outcome. A lot of people were feeling that it might be linked to heart attacks, but it was hard to prove. And he was alerted to the presence of a database. He worked on it all weekend, and he got a letter to the high-profile journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, and he explained how, although he got it, I think on a weekend, or he got it on a Sunday to them, that throughout the next week, in what should be a closed-loop, completely confidential process of editorial review, peer review of that document that he sent, he had colleagues and people ringing up, don't do it, don't proceed to exclude, you'll do more harm than good. This is an important drug for diabetes. If you get rid of this drug, then they'll be without this important, option for treating their diabetes. And maybe, how do you know more people wouldn't have been benefited from that than the people who would suffer a heart attack? Well, in the end, it happened that there were estimated to be 200,000 heart attacks caused by rosiglitazone.
Wow.
And I just vividly remember, and that's no longer available, I vividly remember that story. It helped me to see that that some of the best institutions of medicine were not free of interference. So yeah, I have not. I mean, you look at Australia's situation. Not many people know this, but our TGA was taken to court by the late owner of a pharmaceutical company called PAM Pharmaceuticals. That was the biggest pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in Australia. It was the pride of Australia's, one of the jewels of our industry. Lots of things were being made there, and when people wanted to see what our manufacturing was like, they'd be from overseas. They'd be taken to tour that company, and because it was making a lot of complementary medicines, also there was a big scandal that blew up, and that ended up closing down the whole factory. But not many people know that. A few years later, that the government, the TGA, was successfully sued because there was a lot of fraud and abuse of authority in the takedown of that company, which I'm hoping to, I guess, convey that company was not aligned to Big Pharma, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think, look, there's I don't know, whatever the history is in Australia, we have a situation and a system which I think is broken. I think that something that makes us vulnerable is something called cost recovery. Now, to be clear, just about every country has a similar drug regulator and has a similar situation. And that situation is that drug companies fund the TGA or equivalent because the drug companies are the sponsors of the drugs that have to be evaluated, and they pay for essentially that entire process. That can open up problems of revolving doors, and I don't think we're free of those things. And look, back to Professor Scarrett, I think he's in a, he's got obviously a huge influence and authority, but along with all of the people involved, I think that massive mistakes have been made, and I think that claims have been made that just aren't true. I was recently seeing, you know, and particularly, let's just consider this. I know we're running into time, but let's consider: is the vaccine, and there's a few of them in Australia that are approved, are they really approved? That's an excellent point of discussion. I would say the answer is no, because if you look at the scheme under which the expedited review system under which they're approved, it's provisional approval. Now, if you go and get if your teenage son gets his L plates, are you going to let him drive across the Nullarbor?
No.
So the provisional approval is based on preliminary and very preliminary data. Now, we had essentially 3 months in what's been, you know, was the phase 2-3 trial of Pfizer, for example, essentially 3 months of data. Now, how can you say anything about the long-term safety on that? That's crazy.
Particularly since the data that's coming out now is contradicting all of that.
Yeah, on both efficacy and safety, and
100%.
And so I think that I think it will come to be seen to have been irresponsible to say that this was safe and effective. I would have to say, if something's provisionally approved, that you shouldn't really be able to say that it's safe. You should have to, because it's potentially so misleading to the Australian public to say that word approved. You see what I mean? Then you should have to, if you have to use the word provisionally approved, you should say, but we don't know A, B, C, D, E. Now, I have to contrast that with full approval, full registration of drugs. Traditionally in Australia, that's usually often a multi-year process. Absolutely, a really good process of ensuring safety of drugs. People need to know that what's been done with every treatment of COVID has not been traditional approval. It's been a new system of approval, which has been around only for the last few years.
Chris, it's obvious we need to restructure TGA and APRA. APRA is just a completely evil organisation as far as I'm concerned. But what would AMPS propose as a system of oversight, first for pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals that the TGA provide, and then APRA for that interface regulatory for health workers?
Sure. Now, we actually have a health declaration, which you can go to on our website under, which is amps.redunion.com.au, but there's a section about open letters, and I think it's called open letters and statements and things like that. We have something called a health declaration, and it's been signed by hundreds of doctors and medical scientists, and that contains suggested political reforms, suggested reforms to the two issues you just mentioned, health practitioner regulation and pharmaceutical regulation. People can read that in full. There's a lot that can be said about APRA. It exists because of essentially a COAG in 2008 and 9. It was introduced as essentially legislated about in 2009 in Queensland, and that legislation was mirrored in all other states and territories. So it's not subject to federal regulation, but an intergovernmental agreement. It's run by a board which is concerned with registrations and policies, but there's also multiple interacting medical boards and other healthcare practitioner boards, I think over 10. there's nothing inherently wrong with having health regulation, setting standards, etc. That's something that's pre-existed APRA for a long time. Different craft groups are regulated by their peers, so I think that's important. What I see is a bureaucratization of medicine. A large number of doctors actually throughout the spectrum of views, are concerned about APRA and live in fear of APRA. And that's actually because they're able to employ lots of non-medical people to notify, or not to notify, but to investigate, put people in this process, which is itself very stressful. And that can result from, say, a notification that's anonymous, and from social media and all sorts of things. I think what is urgently needed is a delineation of the powers of APRA that are really clear. I don't think there's enough of that, and I think that that there's a potential that they can abuse their powers and not really be clearly accountable.
Chris,
You
can I
mentioned-
ask you a maths question? I know you're a doctor, but I'll ask you a maths question. What is the probability that Scott Morrison's brother would work for APRA?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I've heard he was employed by a side committee of APRA. Is that right?
Yeah.
What's the probability? Is that 100% correct? Well, I just can't remember the exact one. He wasn't, to my understanding, he was not in APRA itself, but APRA has many, sort of satellite committees. That was my understanding.
Is that a problem in itself?
Look, I think the problem of conflict of interest is a massive one. It should be a concern all the time. I'm concerned that people aren't more concerned about conflicts of interest that we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah.
It seems like it's not an issue to many people.
It's quite incredible, actually. I find it unbelievable. But I really love what you guys are achieving. I think it's important that we've got hope for the future, so that people can say when they go to the doctor in the future, hey, you're a member of AMPS, because we're talking about the tip of the iceberg at the moment.
Yeah.
And my concern is when people see the big picture, and they will sooner or later, they will see the big picture or they'll die, they're going to lose complete confidence in what's happened through this. So I think it's fundamentally so important that you've created this, you're working towards a better future for medicine, and you've got a plan above that for governance, which is really incredible. And Matt, I love what you're doing. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Most of just about before we wrap up, most of Australians who've served in the military or councils or police or judiciary are eminently aware of an organisation that quietly operates to subvert these organisations through infiltration and secret handshakes. Have you been able to take steps with regard to when implementing AMPS, the structure that prevents being infiltrated by people like this? You screen everybody who comes into AMPS.
Interesting question. It's open to all, to be honest. We haven't, no. But I think we're very close at the level of management and the board.
I guess people would be concerned as, how do we stop the same thing from happening over and over again just by creating another organisation?
Yeah, perennial concern. Yeah, no, not a question. Not something we've particularly considered.
Okay.
You can answer that question. Yeah. You can answer. Sorry, Ainsley, go ahead.
No, you're right, Ken.
No, you can answer that question as it comes up, as it comes along. Look, we're well aware of the group that has infiltrated the vast majority of any leadership in this country, and they're active right across the Western world. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see what happens with AMPS. Lance, to answer your question, 1 in 42,000 is the probability.
There you go. There you go.
One in 42,000. There you go.
Kent's definitely a numbers man.
All right, guys. Well, we are definitely now right on time. So, Dr. Christopher Neal, we really want to thank you for your time this evening. I'm sure we could go for another hour with all the questions that we have for you, the questions that are coming in on the chat. We certainly didn't get to all the questions on the chat, guys. So I do apologize, but hopefully, Dr. Chris Neal, we can get you back at a later stage to continue this conversation, because I know there's a ton more questions on my list here that we definitely haven't got to. So thank you very much for your time. It's been enlightening. Thank you to Kent. Thank you to Lance also for joining me.
Happy to come back sometime too.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Can't wait to catch up in Melbourne, mate. See you soon.
Yeah, see you. Bye.
And everybody out there, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time on Triple Tap. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.